There is a version of alone that is chosen, the solitude of a person who has made deliberate peace with their own company, who has built a life that is full precisely because it is uncluttered. That kind of alone is a decision, and it carries its own dignity. And then there is the other kind. The kind that is not chosen but absorbed, gradually, over years of circumstances that narrow the circle until one morning you look up and realize that what you told yourself was independence has become, at some point without your full awareness, isolation. The two things look similar from the outside. From the inside, one of them is a home and the other is a cage, and only the person living in it knows the difference. Loretta Simmons was 46 years old, and for the past 4 years she had been living in the second kind while telling herself, with genuine conviction, that it was the first. She had come to Family Feud on a Tuesday afternoon in June because her coworker Brenda had submitted an application as a surprise, and the team had been selected, and everyone was excited, and Loretta had said yes, because saying no would have required an explanation she did not want to give. She was a woman who had learned to show up when showing up was expected, who had learned to be useful in rooms where others were the center, who had learned to hold herself together with such consistency that the people around her had stopped asking whether the holding was costing her anything. Steve Harvey would ask. And the answer, which arrived not in words, but in the way Loretta's face changed when she heard 2 words she had not heard directed at her in 4 years, would bring 200 people to their feet and leave Loretta Simmons standing in the center of something she had forgotten was available to her. She was not alone. She had simply stopped being able to see it. Loretta Simmons grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, the oldest of 4 children raised by a single mother, Patricia, who worked as a hospital administrator and ran the household with the particular combination of love and logistics that characterizes women who are responsible for everything and have decided to be good at it rather than resentful of it. Loretta had inherited both the love and the logistics. She had also inherited, though she would not have named it this way, her mother's habit of treating her own needs as secondary, not from martyrdom, but from the simple operational reality of a person who has been the competent one for so long that the competence has become identity. She had married at 28, a man named Gerald who was warm and funny and whose warmth and humor had, over 15 years, failed to compensate for his inability to grow into the partnership that a marriage requires at its foundation. The divorce at 43 had been undramatic and mutual, and in the clinical sense, uncomplicated. What it had not been was emotionally simple. Loretta and Gerald had no children. They had, however, shared a social world, friends, routines, a neighborhood, the texture of a life organized around 2 people. And when the marriage ended, that world had reorganized itself in the way that divorced social worlds do, and Loretta had found herself on the quieter side of the reorganization. She had not been dramatic about it. She had continued working. She was a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm in Nashville, where she had relocated after the divorce, where she was competent and reliable and well-regarded and known primarily as the person who could be counted on to make difficult things manageable. She had made a small circle of coworkers she genuinely liked. She had her routines. She called her mother on Sundays. She was, by every external measure, fine. What she had not done in 4 years was allow herself to need anyone. Not dramatically, not in the obvious ways of someone who is visibly struggling. Simply in the ordinary daily way of a person who permits herself to be cared for, who mentions when something is hard, who accepts help when it is offered without immediately redirecting the conversation toward someone else's needs. She had sealed off that particular capacity with the same efficiency she brought to project management, identified it as a vulnerability, assessed the risk, and quietly decommissioned it. Her coworker Brenda, who was 52 and had known Loretta for 3 years, and possessed the specific perceptiveness of someone who has lived enough to recognize a particular kind of loneliness when she sees it, had submitted the Family Feud application on a Tuesday morning on an impulse she later described as just knowing. She had assembled a team from their office, herself, Loretta, their colleague Marcus, their younger colleague Destiny, and Destiny's husband Terrence. She had told everyone except Loretta about the significance of the occasion, which was that she had also called Loretta's younger sister, Vanessa, who lived in Atlanta, and told her what was happening and asked her to come. Vanessa and Loretta had not had a falling out. There was no estrangement, no letter in a drawer, no fracture with a specific date. What there was instead was the gradual drift that happens between sisters when life gets busy, and one of them goes quiet and the other, not wanting to intrude, matches the quiet, and then both of them are waiting for the other to break the silence. And the silence grows until it is not a silence anymore but a habit. And the habit becomes a year and then 2 years, and then the habitual not talking feels too large to interrupt without acknowledging what it was, which feels too vulnerable. Keeps the silence in place. They had last spoken properly, genuinely, not the logistical exchange of people managing an obligation 2 years ago. Before that, less and less. The drift had tracked exactly with the divorce, which Vanessa now understood, having thought about it carefully, had been when Loretta had begun her quiet withdrawal not just from Gerald, but from everyone. Vanessa had answered Brenda's call on a Thursday morning. She had said yes before Brenda had finished the sentence. The Family Feud taping began as tapings do, with the particular organized chaos of a studio preparing to become television, with an audience finding its seats and a production team running through logistics, and the contestants getting their bearings in a space that is larger and brighter than it appears on a screen. Loretta moved through the pre-show preparations with her characteristic efficiency. She was good in unfamiliar situations. One of the things project management had given her was the ability to read a new environment quickly and orient herself within it. She watched Steve Harvey work the room before the cameras rolled and registered him as someone who was very good at his job in a way that was not reducible to the job. The attention was real. The warmth was real. The humor landed because it was rooted in genuine observation rather than performed bonhomie. When he reached their team in the pre-show segment, he moved through Destiny and Terrence with quick, easy rapport, spent a genuine 2 minutes with Marcus on the subject of Nashville's evolution as a city, and then arrived at Brenda, who had been waiting with the composed excitement of someone who knows something the room does not know and is managing the knowledge carefully. Steve asked Brenda about the team. How did they all know each other? Brenda said they worked together. Steve asked who was the glue, the person the rest of them leaned on. Brenda, without hesitation, looked at Loretta. Loretta made the small self-deprecating gesture of someone accustomed to deflecting exactly this kind of attribution. I just keep things organized, she said. That's not what she said, Steve pointed out. She said glue. Glue doesn't just keep things organized. Glue holds things together. He looked at Loretta directly. Who holds you together? The question was asked conversationally, lightly, in the tone of a host who asks 100 questions per episode and occasionally asks one that is something else entirely. Loretta received it with the practiced ease of someone who handles this kind of question regularly and has a functional answer ready. I hold myself together, she said, with a small smile, the kind of smile that is also a closing of a door. Steve Harvey looked at her for a moment. How long have you been doing that alone? The smile held, but something behind it shifted, a barely perceptible movement, the kind that a person watching closely, which Steve Harvey always was, would catch and file. A while, Loretta said. He let it sit for exactly 1 beat. Then he moved on in the easy way of a host who is not done but is not yet ready to be done, who is managing a longer arc than the current exchange. The audience laughed at something Marcus said. The energy lifted. Loretta's smile relaxed into something genuine. The main game was close and full of life. Destiny turned out to be exceptional at fast money. Marcus had an unlikely encyclopedic knowledge of household products that served the team well in 2 rounds, and Brenda's quiet competitiveness surfaced in the 4th round in a way that delighted Steve Harvey and produced the show's most memorable exchange of the evening. The team won in the end, by a margin that felt earned. During the post-win celebration, Steve Harvey let the room settle in the way he had learned to let rooms settle. Then he walked back to center stage and looked at Loretta. I want to come back to something, he said, before we finish. Loretta looked at him, the composure present and intact. You told me you hold yourself together, Steve said, that you've been doing it alone for a while. He paused. Can I ask you something honest? Of course, she said. The voice of a woman who has answered honest questions in professional settings for 20 years and is good at it. When is the last time you let someone hold you together? The studio was quiet. Loretta opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at her hands briefly, a gesture so small and so involuntary that it was visible only because the room was paying the kind of attention that rooms pay when something true is happening. Then she looked up at Steve Harvey and said, in a voice that was still steady but had lost its management quality, its project management quality, the quality of a person presenting rather than speaking. I don't remember. The 2 words arrived with the weight of 4 years behind them. Steve Harvey held her gaze. He did not look away from it, did not allow the moment to be absorbed back into the rhythm of the show. He held it, which was itself an act, the act of not letting a person who has spent 4 years making themselves invisible continue to be invisible in this particular moment. You think you're alone, he said, not a question. Loretta held her chin level. Her eyes were bright in the way that eyes get before tears come to people who do not permit themselves to cry in public. "Most days," she said, quietly, honestly, the most honest thing she had said in the building. Steve Harvey looked at her for one long moment. Then he said, in a voice so direct and simple that it bypassed every defense she had spent 4 years constructing, "Loretta, you're not." He nodded toward the side entrance. Vanessa Simmons walked out. She was 42 years old, 4 years younger than Loretta, and she walked with the particular pace of someone who is moving as quickly as dignity permits, not running, because running would be too much, but not slow, because slow would not be enough. She was wearing the yellow dress she wore to things that mattered because Loretta had told her years ago that she looked like herself in yellow, and she had thought about that sentence while she was getting dressed that morning, and decided that looking like herself was the correct aim for this afternoon. Loretta saw her sister and the composure went. Not gradually. It went all at once, cleanly, the way a structure goes when the thing holding it together is suddenly, completely removed. She put both hands over her face. Her shoulders came forward. She made a sound that was not a word but contained everything that 4 years of managed solitude had been keeping in its place. Vanessa crossed the stage and put her arms around her sister without waiting, without the careful negotiation of distance that had characterized the previous reunion moments on that stage, because this was not the kind of estrangement that required careful approach. There was no wound to be careful of in the same way. There were simply two sisters who had let the silence grow too large and who were now standing inside the consequence of having let it grow, and the consequence was also the cure, which was this, being held. Loretta held on, for a long time. The way you hold on when you have been not holding on for 4 years and have just been given permission, explicitly and publicly, to stop. Brenda, who had engineered this, stood with her hands pressed to her heart. Marcus was looking at the ceiling. Destiny had her face in Terrence's shoulder. The audience was standing without having been asked to stand, which was the measure Steve Harvey always used for whether something real was happening. When Loretta finally lifted her head from her sister's shoulder, her face had changed. Not in the way of someone who had resolved something, who had arrived at a conclusion, in the way of someone who has just been reminded of something they had stopped believing was available, and is still in the process of understanding that it is. The relief of it was in her face. The complexity of the relief, 4 years of why did I let it go so long, and simultaneously the simple, bodily gratitude of being held was in her face too. She was not managing her face anymore. She was simply wearing it. Steve Harvey spoke only when the embrace had run its full course and both women were standing beside each other, Vanessa's arm around Loretta's shoulders. "I want to say something," Steve said, "and I'm going to say it to the room and to the cameras and to everybody watching at home." He paused. "We spend a lot of time in this life admiring people who hold themselves together. We call them strong. We call them dependable. We count on them. And we genuinely forget, that holding yourself together alone for long enough is not strength. It is a kind of slow disappearing." He held the silence for a moment. "The strongest thing Loretta Simmons did today was not win a game. It was answer an honest question honestly. It was say out loud in front of people that she did not remember the last time she let someone hold her together." His voice was quiet and entirely without its entertainment register. "That took more courage than anything I have seen on this stage this season." He looked at Brenda. "And this woman, who saw something that Loretta had made very difficult to see and did something about it, that is what friendship actually looks like, not the easy version, the real version." Brenda pressed her lips together and nodded once, the nod of someone who is not going to speak because speaking would undo the composure she is working to maintain. Steve looked at both sisters. "You didn't fall out. You didn't have a fight, you just let it get quiet and the quiet got heavy and here you are." He paused. "Here you are, that's the whole thing, you showed up, both of you." He smiled, the real smile, the one that appeared when something on his stage had moved him past the management of his professional warmth into something simpler. "The quiet's over now." The episode aired on a Friday evening. Within 24 hours, the clip had been viewed 36 million times, and the response, in volume, in emotional texture, in the specificity of what it unlocked in people, was unlike the responses that had preceded it on that stage. What was different about this one was the absence of a dramatic fracture. There had been no abandonment, no 22-year silence, no letter in a drawer. There had simply been drift, the ordinary, unremarkable, entirely common process by which people who love each other lose the thread, and then lose the habit of finding it, and then find themselves one day holding a phone in their hand wondering how it got to be 2 years. The clip spread through communities of middle-aged women with the velocity of something that has named a familiar experience precisely. The comment sections were full of messages that began, "This is me and my sister. This is me and my best friend. This is me and the person I stopped calling because I didn't know how to explain why I had stopped calling. The phrase "you're not," the two words Steve Harvey had said to Loretta before Vanessa walked out, traveled independently of the clip. It appeared in text messages and birthday cards and therapy session summaries, and one particularly widely shared essay in which a writer described the years following her divorce as a period in which she had convinced herself, with considerable internal sophistication, that her aloneness was chosen, and how encountering those two words on a Friday evening had disrupted that conviction in a way she had not been able to re-establish. Loretta gave no formal interview. She declined, politely and finally, all media requests. She did, however, send a handwritten note to the production team that the producers described as one of the most eloquent pieces of correspondence they had received from a contestant, a note that expressed gratitude not for the surprise, which had been overwhelming in ways she was still processing, but for the question. For the moment when Steve Harvey had looked at her and declined to accept the door-closing smile and had asked again underneath it. She said that being asked again, having someone decide that the first answer was not the full answer, and that the full answer was worth waiting for, was something she had not experienced in 4 years, and that she had not understood until that moment how much she had missed it. Vanessa flew from Atlanta to Nashville the following weekend and stayed for 4 days. They did not have the dramatic, revelatory conversation of a reunion that has waited decades. They had, instead, the conversation of two sisters who have been apart for 2 years and have a great deal of ordinary ground to cover. They talked about their mother, about Vanessa's job, about Loretta's house, about Gerald in the brief, resolved way of people who have fully processed a thing and are comfortable with the processing. They cooked together on Saturday, which was something they had not done since they were children in Patricia's kitchen in Memphis. Vanessa had retained more of their mother's recipes than Loretta had, which Loretta found both unsurprising and unexpectedly moving. On the last evening of the visit, sitting on Loretta's back porch with the Nashville summer doing what Nashville summers do, Vanessa said, "I should have called more." Loretta said, "I made it hard to call." Vanessa said, "You always make things hard by making them look easy." Loretta considered this for a moment and said, "That is the most accurate thing anyone has said to me in years." Vanessa said, "I know, I'm your sister." They called their mother together the next morning on speakerphone from Loretta's kitchen. Patricia's response, silence for 3 seconds, then a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, then the single word "finally," said with the force of a woman who has been waiting for this call for 2 years without permitting herself to request it, was, by Loretta's account, the best thing she had heard in a very long time. Brenda received no formal acknowledgement from Loretta at first. What she received, on the Monday after the taping, was Loretta at her desk 20 minutes before their usual start time with 2 cups of coffee and the specific, quiet quality of someone who is choosing to be present differently than they have been. Brenda had accepted the coffee and said nothing. That was how Brenda understood that the thank you had been delivered. Some people say thank you with words. Loretta said it by staying in the room. Over the following year, Loretta and Vanessa spoke every Thursday evening. Not every conversation was significant. Most of them were ordinary updates about work and health and the rotating cast of minor events that constitutes a life in progress. But the ordinary conversations were themselves the thing, which both of them understood. Ordinariness between people who have chosen to maintain contact is not a failure of significance. It is significance, accumulated across many Thursdays, in the specific way that things that matter are built. Steve Harvey referenced the episode obliquely in a public conversation about loneliness in America without naming any individual. He spoke about the difference between isolation and solitude and about the specific danger of people who are very competent at appearing fine, not because they are deceptive, but because their competence is genuine and their management of difficulty is real, and so nothing in their external presentation signals to the people around them that something is wrong. He said, "The people I worry about most are not the ones who are visibly struggling. They are the ones who have gotten very good at not visibly struggling and who have been so good at it for so long that they have stopped checking whether the not struggling is costing them something." He said, "Sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is ask the question under the question they already answered. Ask it again. Wait for the real one." Loretta Simmons continued her work at the construction firm, continued her Sunday calls with her mother, continued her Thursday calls with her sister. She was still competent, still reliable, still the person who could be counted on to hold difficult things together. The difference was a small one, externally, a slightly shorter gap before she answered a personal question, a slightly greater willingness to let her face show what it was showing, a slightly reduced frequency of the door closing smile. Internally, the difference was larger. It was the difference between a life managed and a life inhabited, between being the glue that held things together and allowing herself to be, sometimes, one of the things that needed holding. She had not lost the competence. She had simply added something to it. The something was not large and not dramatic and did not require a name. It was the ordinary capacity to let people in, exercised on Thursdays and Sunday mornings and Monday mornings with 2 cups of coffee, and on one particular Tuesday in June in a television studio in front of 200 people, when a man she had never met decided that her first answer was not her full answer and waited patiently and directly for the full one. She was not alone. She was, in fact, entirely surrounded. She had simply needed someone to say it out loud. If this story moved you, like it and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe and never miss a story like this one.